let us now dive into this next part and the actual map making. Now, this is the thing that really intrigues me. We're just gonna cover this a little bit tonight, but like I know there's different types of maps. There's casual play maps to where it's just like whatever you got. Maybe you got like one of the master sets terrains, and you just build whatever comes to your mind. Start stones be damned, and you just play with family, you play with friends, and you have fun with it. So there's that casual element. And then there is an element that we didn't really talk about, but there's like mini maps. Like I do a lot of mini maps like on the side of my desk here because that's all that I have room for when I do skirmishes. There's also like unique YouTubers who create like mini maps for like maybe like D&D sequences out of Heroscape terrain, or it could be a Heroscape gameplay, but it's just it's those with limited amount of terrain tiles, and they're very well done. But what we want to look at and explore tonight a little bit is the competitive maps. Now, is there, Jack, like a specific rule set and way of doing these? And also, like, I'll bring up this page as well in a second. But there's obviously a community for this, and link descriptions below, links provided that shows just all the maps that you can see like on. I don't have Heroscape.org, but I got Heroscapers.com, and I'm going to bring that up in a second. And look through those. But if you want to give just like a basic definition on like tournament map making and how you got started with it, and what are some of those like first rules to get in and start on the ground rolling for those who are just like say starting to get interested in doing that type of thing.
Yeah, there's definitely rules that are good to follow when you're first getting into competitive map making. There's a really good article by Big Bullfrog, and if you guys do another map building podcast, I would heavily recommend having him on.
I'd love to have him. Yeah, I'd
super helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Super influential and helpful in the map community. And he has an article that kind of goes through a lot of good tips when designing competitive maps. And I can kind of summarize that and give my own thoughts. But basically, like when you're making a competitive map, the number one goal is to have a battlefield that creates the smoothest kind of matchups for as many figures in Heroscape as possible. So that means, things like, you probably don't want height in your start zone. Like you don't want like a level 4 perch that Savaris can just chill on the entire tournament and fire away at you, or else that's gonna cause a lot of frustration and angst in your tournament. So creating maps that have the smoothest matchups, and there are some units in the game that we particularly keep an eye out for. This includes figures like Raylan, figures like basically any dragon, rats, Death Reavers, and then there are other ones like Blastotrons and Gladiatrons. Trying to think of any VC characters that specifically break maps. None are coming to mind right now, but
kind of describe that. What does it mean by breaking maps for a Heroscape miniature? Like, explain some of that process.
Yeah. So like when a figure breaks a map, it means that they can easily set up in a spot on the map that can basically grant the player an auto win. If your map has, similarly to the Savaris example I gave, if your map has like a single perch where Raylan can chill on behind a wall of like figures, then where it's very difficult to take her out, where she has 4 or 5 defense if she's next to like a jungle bush, then then that would be a map that Raylan breaks. Similarly with like dragons and I guess Q9 to an extent, if you have like a perch that they can get to that is hard to contest, where they can just kind of fly around or just shoot for free from, then that would be a map that those figures who are already really good in the game, that can abuse that map and make for very unfun tournament games.
I found some players local. We kind of met up for like they were kind of newer players. They just wanted to play the game, and they wanted to play one of the classic Rise of the Valkyrie scenarios. We made Michael's Tomb, and I had Zelrig, and I never saw them again afterwards.
No.
Because I went up on the thing and just blasted everyone in the middle.
You lost some friends that
Yeah,
day.
you're not going to make friends with Zelrig. Yep. Nope.
Yeah. Zelrig was a unit that a lot of people worried about back when I started making maps. And Zelrig is still a problem, but he's less of a problem just because people have over time learned how to play around Zelrig. But like, for example, you don't see a lot of maps where Zelrig can reach your start zone turn 1 and get like 5 or 6 targets in one shot. You see a map like Sirocco, like right here. This is a redux of an older map called Sirocco by Mad Wookie. And Zelrig is a 6-move flying figure. Zelrig can Z-bomb the start zone, and that is not what you want. Now, granted, if Zelrig wants to get an optimal Z-bomb, I believe he'd have to get down into shadow, which would mean that your figures could get to him pretty easily. Or he'd have to take one of these sides and get just a few off. But yeah, Zelrig was one of those map defining units for a long time, and over time people have kind of been like, okay, well, we kind of know how to play around Zelrig. We just space out in the start zone. And I think also having figure limits become a big thing in like Heroscape tournaments has changed that as well. I wasn't really around when Zelrig was a big problem, but yeah, he's definitely one of those figures that you have to consider. And then you have like rats, right? That are just, they're screening units. They're meant to clog up the board and prevent you from getting to whatever your opponent doesn't want you to hit. So that could be figures like Krav Maga agents, Q9, Q10, or even Raylan, or any of that combination. So you don't want like maps that have a lot of one space choke points. So maps, castle maps are a good example of that, or ×2 road maps. If you want to scroll to Viney Pines here, so you'll notice that there are not a whole lot of one space gaps, but like in between those 2 trees, where I'm calling myself out here for this, that spot right there could be a really good spot for a rat to close off that whole entire access point and engage a figure that's trying to maybe get around to something in the start zone. If you can put a rat somewhere that is a really important part of the map to prevent your opponent's progress, then that could be a map that rats could break. That also goes into Biga's rule number 9, are there too many choke points? And choke points just they're not great for a whole lot of competitive maps. You want ease of movement for your armies, especially. I try to keep in mind like 4-move units, and now granted, like there's not a lot of great 4-move units. Knights are technically 4-move, but if you're playing them in tournament, you usually have Gilbert, so they're usually like 5 or 6 or 7-move in reality. But you want to keep in mind like units in the game that have a hard time with development. So like and keeping that balance in mind. So like I try to keep in mind the difference between like figures that can fly and figures that can't fly. How easy is it for one figure with flying to get to a point in the map versus a figure with the same amount of movement that doesn't have flying? So usually you see a gradual shift like in levels. It's pretty smooth. Like there are some maps like my maps to Coven that are just kind of like it's kind of like a hill, and yeah, you have some level 4 spots, but you have spots where a 5-move unit can get to level 3, or you know, flying figures, they can get to level 4, but it's lava.
Right.
Seshavon is one of my, or Stakhaven is one of my favorite maps of yours I played on for sure.
I like it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And it actually like ties into a comment that Hexala is saying. Joe, do you want to ask about this about Symmetry?
Because obviously when you build maps, especially for competitive play, they're asymmetrical, either vertically or horizontally. And Hexala wants to know what your thoughts are on asymmetrical tournament maps.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of asymmetrical tournament maps. There are some out there, and I've tried my hand at that. None that I've been happy with. But asymmetrical maps are things that I would like to see more of in Heroscape. Asymmetrical competitive maps. Really, right now, the only asymmetrical maps that come to mind are Tikala Sunrise, which is a Wargrounds Escape map.
Is it what? Which one?
It's a Wargrounds Escape map. It was also in the Battlefields of Valhalla. But that is kind of like the premier asymmetrical map. It's been around forever. And then there is Subduction by Ulysses. That is a newer map that was actually made during a map contest hosted by Mega Silver. And then
let me see if I can...
Sorry if I'm going too fast here.
Oh no, I want to bring it up real quick if I can find it.
Well, Tikala Sunrise, I'm looking at it. It looks...
Okay, there's Subduction. Here, look. And that's actually a pretty intense map, too.
What was the other one? Subjective?
Subduction.
Here, hold on a second. Okay, I'm going to bring this up, and here, let's just take a look at this. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here for this, but yeah, it's...
and it's actually, if you'll notice, it's actually fairly symmetrical. It's very slightly asymmetrical, but there is some asymmetry in there.
I see it, yeah.
And that's kind of that's kind of like what a lot of asymmetrical tournament maps end up looking like, where it's fairly symmetrical, but it's still
almost mirrored.
Yeah, there's still some asymmetry going on. Tikala Sunrise, like I said, it's probably the most
excuse me.
Probably like the top tier example of like
that one?
That is a map by GameBear, and it's also in the Wargrounds Escape.
Okay.
And it is definitely one of the best tournament asymmetrical maps that we have out there. Okay. But you'll look at it and you'll see that it's actually fairly symmetrical to some degree. There's-
Okay.
What was it? What was it called again?
Takala Sunrise.
Okay.
If you're searching, Ryan, if you're just searching up on Heroscapers, I would recommend going to the .org and going to maps and typing it in. It's a lot quicker.
Yes, sir. Okay. Give me a second. Keep on
While
talking.
you're pulling that up, it is. I think it's really interesting, kind of coming from playing the game as a map builder. I think you really kind of are able to pinpoint on kind of the inner mechanisms of what makes a Heroscape, a competitive Heroscape game kind of work. You're talking about movement and placement and height and all these kind of things that are very important aspects to someone playing at a competitive level. So I think you kind of get this weird insight into it, like almost like the map is a neutral player in the game almost, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of my goal as a map maker. I mean, obviously, I want a map that I want all my maps to be unique and provide interesting gameplay, but also I want them to be fair. And yeah, here's Takala Sunrise.
Yeah.
There is asymmetry there, but it is very very slight. And it's a good map. It's kind of a big map, so I'd recommend, if you're playing on it, to play with a lot of figures for those big fun battles.
Get some Mara on that thing.
Oh yeah, some Drudge. Oh, that, or it could be a fun scenario map too, where you have like the hive in the center and all that. But yeah, no, I think the goal for most map makers, at least nowadays, is to have maps that are both dynamic but fair. That's what I try to do. That's what a lot of modern map makers try to do. There are some people that are pushing the boundary, and I try to do that as well. Yeah, you want your maps to. You don't want somebody leaving your map thinking, "Oh, that map just lost me the game." Like, that is
Not
kind
that
of the
has never happened before.
There's definitely been people that have cursed my maps before. Not my fault, but maybe the glyphs' faults.
Yeah,
no,
glyphs.
I mean, yeah, it's always the glyphs' fault.
Yep.
Yeah. It's yeah, the map making is both it's very technical, but it's also like you also have to take the aesthetics in mind as well. If we want to get into that, maybe. But
in 1 second, because I do have another question popping up in the chat, and this comes from Rowan, asking if you have any advice for someone, because this can be a lot of people, with very limited terrain trying to build maps. What would you recommend doing when it comes to that?
If you're looking to build your own maps, I would definitely suggest downloading Virtualscape if you have a PC, and using your map restrictions. Virtualscape allows you to type in, what your restrictions are, and you can kind of experiment from there. If you have a full Rise of the Valkyrie terrain set, or any of the master sets really, there are a lot of great maps out there that use a single Rise of the Valkyrie map, or Valkyrie terrain set, but definitely try to experiment on Virtualscape with whatever you have. A lot of competitive maps, if you're getting into competitive map making, they do go by there usually are stricter terrain requirements. Usually you only take terrain from X amount of master sets and X amount of expansion sets. So Takala Sunrise only uses Swarm of the Morrow and Takala Jungle. And that's actually a pretty light combination of terrain. I obviously Takala Jungle is expensive, but if you have custom Takala Jungle terrain like I have, or
soon will be coming out too.
Yep, there's new jungle terrain coming out in a few months. You could build that map. But Virtualscape is great for finding out what your limits are. Or you could do what I did when I first started playing with Heroscape terrain, just throw whatever together and don't worry about competitive viability. It's
a good thing to build yourself up towards. It's like you're not going to get perfection right off the bat, but as long as it's something you're building towards, if you want to cultivate and craft that part in your mind and in your creative endeavors, for sure.
I think the abstraction of Virtualscape is really probably helpful if you're wanting to plan a map out. I have the exact opposite problem. I have too much terrain. I get like a kid building Legos. I just want to build a little map, little 2-player map. Let's just have a game in. And I'm like, oh wait, let's add this cool feature over here. Let's add a little waterfall going into it.
And then you have this.
Yeah. Rogue, you should make that map and send a picture of it to me, because
I probably could.
Yeah.
I cannot make this map with my terrain. I do not have enough terrain to build this. So
very nice.
I think it has helped me in the fact that I am very utilitarian with the terrain that I have. And probably why I got into competitive map making, because the terrain restrictions are usually so limited. Usually you don't even have, there's not a single competitive map that I've played on that uses ×2 Rise of the Valkyrie, for example. It's just too much terrain. But there's so many good maps that use 1 Rise or 1 Rise and ×1 expansion. And that's hours of possibilities with and multiple games that you can play with that same terrain limit. So yeah, there's countless possibilities that you can do there.
Endless combinations, really. Even if you only have a limited amount of terrain for that.
Yeah, if I might touch on that with talking about limited terrain, Heroscape.org still for me is one of the best websites. So if you go to maps, you could actually type in what master sets you have or expansions you have, and we'll show you what competitive tournament maps you can build.